Speaking of debt, China has its own share of trouble as well. Local governments in China are drowning in debt. They are in a pretty bad place. Just how bad? Let me tell you. The city of Wuhan has decided to name and shame borrowers. They have printed a list of 259 entities in the state newspaper. How much money do they owe? Around 300 million yuan, which is around $42 million. Some of these loans date back to December 2018. And who are these borrowers? A range of businesses, car companies, financial bureaus, real estate firms, all of them owe money to the Wuhan government. This is the first time the city has resorted to such a strategy. The desperation is almost childlike. Think back to your school days. Remember when talkative students had their names written on the blackboard? This is very similar. So the question is, what's happening in Wuhan? Is the city running out of cash? Wuhan's revenue in the first quarter of this year was $7 billion. On paper, that's a lot. But compare it to last year. The revenue is 8.5% less compared to quarter 1 of 2022. So liquidity crunch could be one reason. You need money to pay your own debt. The Wuhan government has asked these 250 plus entities to repay the loans immediately. But here's the problem. Wuhan is just a small part of a much bigger issue. Like I said, China's local governments are drowning in debt. How much money are we talking about? According to Goldman Sachs, $23 trillion. That's how big the debt pile is. Let me put that number in perspective. China's entire GDP is around $12 trillion. So the total government debt is twice the national GDP. This raises two questions. Number one, why were so many loans taken? And number two, will there be a crisis down the line? Most of these loans were taken in the last 2 decades. That's when China began a building spree. Ports, highways, high-rises, China was building at the rate of knots. That infrastructure push was backed by loans. But will it backfire? That's where experts are divided. You see, most of this debt is owned by state banks. So the central government in Beijing has a lot of power over it. They can just ask the banks to roll over the payments or maybe extend the deadline. But for how long? Eventually, these local governments will have to repay, and that's where revenue is a problem. Local government debt was 120% of revenue in 2022. In some cities, it's even worse, like Hegang in northeastern China. By 2021, their total debt had risen to 30 billion yuan. That's 230% of their income. Think of it this way. You have taken a lot of loans from your brother. Your debt is now more than your income. The good news is the lender is family. Maybe he will extend the deadline. The bad news is you will have to pay eventually. For local governments, that means tightening the screws, smaller budgets, more taxes and lesser expenses. Also more ways of raising funds, which brings us back to Wuhan. The local government's move shows how desperate they are for cash. Any money is good money right now. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to visit the US next month. There's a lot on the agenda, from trade to security to Ukraine. But ahead of the visit, a US House panel has made an interesting pitch. It says India should join the NATO plus arrangement. I know you must have a lot of questions, like what is this House panel? What is NATO plus? And should India join it? Let's start with the first question. The proposal was made by the House Select Committee on the strategic competition between the US and the Chinese Communist Party. Yes, it's a mouthful, but it's more commonly called the China Committee. And what has this committee said? Let me quote. Including India in NATO plus security arrangements would build upon the US and India's close partnership to strengthen global security and deter the aggression of the CCP across the Indo-Pacific region. So that answers the first question. Secondly, what is NATO plus? Think of it as NATO's extended family. Right now, there are 5 NATO plus members: Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Japan and South Korea. What's common about them? They are not Atlantic countries, which is why they are part of NATO plus and not NATO. You may ask, what's the difference? For starters, no mutual defense. NATO members are bound by Article 5. This article says an attack on one member is an attack on all. It's called collective security. NATO plus members do not get this shield. What they do get is this: more intelligence sharing, more weaponry, and more military cooperation. Now, to the final question: what should India do about this pitch? Well, right now, it's a recommendation. Such an offer has not been made by the US government. Neither has New Delhi expressed interest in it. But recently, there have been exchanges. In 2019, India held its first meeting with NATO. It was more political than military, sort of like getting to know each other. Then in March 2023, there was another meeting. America's NATO envoy said the door was opening for more engagement with India. But again, NATO Plus wasn't mentioned. So how should New Delhi see this recommendation? With a lot of doubts. Politically, the recommendation shows India's importance to the West, how it sees India as a rising power, but there is a downside. The panel also sees India as a means to an end, that end being China. Let's face it, that's a dangerous place to be because NATO is famous for using and throwing allies. And that's just one part of the problem. India's foreign policy is built on strategic autonomy, meaning New Delhi is close to everyone, to the US, to Europe, to Russia. But joining NATO Plus would limit that autonomy. It would push India closer to the West. Chances are that will hamper relations with Russia. You see, neutrality is very delicate. And right now, India is in the perfect place. It is a member of the Quad, but it is also a member of the SCO. It is invited to the G7 summit. Yet, it is also part of BRICS. Joining NATO Plus would tip that balance. Another issue is the level of commitment and cooperation required. Just look at the other NATO Plus members. Australia and New Zealand fought 2 world wars with America. That's how old the partnership is. Japan and South Korea are part of America's nuclear umbrella, and the US-Israel relationship doesn't need an introduction. The US is Israel's biggest political and military partner. See the problem? India's relationship with the US is very different. It is not based on shared history or treaties or culture. It is based on strategic considerations. And what is New Delhi's strategic consideration right now? To create a multipolar world, to build closer relationships with Russia and the West. NATO doesn't permit that. Neither does NATO Plus. It's an alliance rooted in the Cold War era of binaries. You are either with us or against us. Such an attitude doesn't serve India's foreign policy. Does that mean India should cut off all engagements? Absolutely not. NATO is the most powerful alliance in human history. Engaging with it is common sense. But joining it? That's the red line India shouldn't cross. There are ways to deepen engagement without joining NATO Plus, like the Quad or simply bilateral cooperation. That gives India more wiggle room in foreign policy. Now let's talk about space, the final frontier. Turns out the race to conquer that frontier is heating up. Over the last week, we've seen a flurry of space-related activity. Let's start with India. The Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, has launched a satellite today. The GSLV F-12 rocket successfully took to the skies. It took off from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota in the state of Andhra Pradesh. The rocket carried the NVS-01 Next Generation Navigation Satellite into orbit. The satellite has both civilian and military applications. It helps with navigation, positioning, and timing services. It even carries an indigenous atomic clock for precise timekeeping. Some other big news greeted Indian space enthusiasts as well. ISRO's chief confirmed that the Chandrayaan-3 lunar exploration mission will launch this July. The planned date is July 12. If successful, it will expand India's footprint on the moon and certify India's growing space credentials. Of course, India isn't the only nation looking to the stars. South Korea launched its first homegrown commercial-grade rocket last Thursday. It ejected several satellites to observe cosmic radiation. On Friday, NASA launched a pair of its tropic storm research satellites. Russia launched a Soyuz rocket carrying a Condor reconnaissance satellite on Saturday. And even China had some big space news to share today.
The General Command has studied and decided to target the launch of the Shenzhou 16 manned spacecraft at 9:31 Beijing time on May 30th. The flight crew consists of astronauts Jing Haipeng, Zhu Yangchu and Gui Haichao. Jing Haipeng served as the commander.
Of particular interest is the third astronaut.
Payload expert Gui Haichao is a professor at Beijing University. He is mainly responsible for the on-orbit operation of space science experimental payloads. He received professional training in fields such as science and aerospace engineering and has rich operational experience.
This is the first time China is sending a civilian into space. Every other Chinese astronaut has been a member of the People's Liberation Army. This marks a new stage in Chinese space activities. And that's not all.
Recently, the lunar landing phase of China's manned lunar exploration project has been launched and implemented. The overall goal is to achieve the first Chinese landing on the moon by 2030, conduct lunar scientific research and related technical experiments, and master key technologies such as Earth-to-Moon round-trip, short-term lunar surface stay, and human-machine joint exploration, and complete multiple tasks such as landing, patrol, mining, research and return.
Yes, China is also ramping up its lunar mission. It reiterated its goal of sending people to the moon by 2030. We had told you about Beijing's lunar plans a few days ago and about how the US is wary of China's growing space capabilities. That was on full display over the weekend. Brigadier General Jesse Morehouse of the US Space Command made a statement, and I quote, "The United States of America is ready to fight tonight in space if we have to." Morehouse cited Russia's aggression and China's vision to become a dominant space power as the reason. He said it left the US with no choice but to prepare for orbital skirmishes. And what is the US doing to prepare? Developing anti-satellite technologies. Think about all the satellite launches over the last week we mentioned. They show how essential satellites are to our day-to-day lives. And countries know this. They know that enemy nations can be crippled by taking out their satellites. Russia and China are building spacecraft capable of anti-satellite operations. Russia, China, the US and India have tested ground-based anti-satellite missiles. It's a new avenue for war, and countries are getting ready. Add this to the rapid rocket launches, and we are seeing a new competition emerge, a new scramble for the moon, a new space race, and this time, India is right there among the competitors. There's big news in the US. Joe Biden has struck a debt deal. He should finally be able to raise the debt ceiling, meaning no default, no doomsday for the global economy. The deal was struck over the weekend by Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The full document was released on Sunday. Now comes the big task, convincing lawmakers to pass the bill. Biden has called the deal a compromise. McCarthy has called it worthy of the American people. Both sides have made some concessions. The key is to convince hardliners in both parties that those concessions were necessary.
We've just spoke with Speaker McCarthy, and we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement that we're ready to move to the full Congress. And I think it's a really important step forward. And this is a deal is good news, I believe you'll see, for the American people. The agreement prevents the worst possible crisis, a default, for the first time in our nation's history.
I'm not sure who you're talking to, because we did a conference call with our conference, and over 95% were overwhelmingly excited about what they see. They're getting the text today in the process.
So what's in this all-important deal? The most important part is the debt ceiling itself. It has suspended until January 2025, which means the US government can borrow again. That deadline is also important for Biden. He faces re-election in November 2024, so he won't have to negotiate another debt ceiling, at least not in this term. Let me quickly run you through the rest. Non-military spending for 2024 will be the same as 2023, meaning a cap on spending. But in 2025, it can be increased by 1%. That will make the Republicans happy. At the same time, spending on military and veterans will increase. That's something Biden pushed for. He's also agreed to slash spending on tax collection. Biden had set aside $80 billion to hunt tax evaders. That's been reduced by $10 billion. Most Social Security and Medicare schemes have been retained. But there are new work requirements for government aid. Like I said, both sides have compromised. But it doesn't matter what we think. What matters is whether hardline Republicans and Democrats will support it. Especially Republicans. They hold a wafer-thin majority in the US House. Plus, Kevin McCarthy is not in absolute control. He himself was elected Speaker on the 15th ballot. So the question is, can McCarthy get the bill passed? If he can't, all this will be for nothing. We'll be back to square one. So right now, that's the biggest worry for Biden, getting this deal passed in the House and Senate. The stock markets have rebounded after news of the deal trickled in. Oil prices have also recovered. So the short-term impact has been good. But what about the long term? How will this deal affect the US economy? Many experts are worried about the spending cap. Expenditure for 2024 has been capped at the 2023 levels. That could hurt American recovery. Bloomberg says there is a 65% risk of recession in the US. To avoid that, spending must increase. It's Economics 101. If you want to reverse an economic downturn, you must spend more. This deal prevents that. Spending will not increase next year. And the year after, it will increase by just 1%. Problem number 2 is liquidity. Once the deal is passed, the US Treasury will hit overdrive. It will have to raise a lot of money in very little time. How do they do that? By issuing bonds to the private sector. It's normal business for the Treasury, but this time the scale is massive. If the Treasury usually issues 10 bonds in one day, it will now have to issue 20. This could suck liquidity out of the system, reduce the amount on money held by the private sector. And what happens when liquidity disappears? Again, slow down. Bank of America says the impact will be equivalent to a 25 basis point interest hike. That's not good news for the US economy, especially not right now. All these challenges tell us one thing. The US debt ceiling is dangerous. Maybe it promotes bipartisanship and accountability, but only if the leaders are mature enough. In modern-day America, that doesn't seem to be the case. Leaders have repeatedly weaponized the debt ceiling, used it to politically blackmail the sitting president. So maybe that should be the biggest takeaway from this crisis, the irrelevance for the debt ceiling. And now let's turn our attention to Canada. It is burning. Its eastern city of Halifax has declared an emergency. It is suffering from wildfires. Homes are going up in flames. There are power outages and hundreds of people are being evacuated. The fire has sent a huge pall of smoke over the city, but this port city is not the only one facing the brunt of wildfires. Hundreds of other wildfires are burning in Canada. Why is this happening, and what measures is Canada taking? Our next report tells you.
That's fire.
What you just saw is a dashcam video. It shows a car being driven through Halifax. This is an eastern Canadian city, and a wildfire is ravaging the port city, burning out of control. These visuals are shocking, but they aren't the only ones. Look at this huge pall of smoke. This too is a result of the same wildfire, which sent up a huge cloud of smoke over the port city. This looks scary because it is. There are flames everywhere. Roads are affected. Houses are burning. There are power outages. All in all, the situation is hazardous. And Halifax has declared a state of local emergency, which will be in effect for at least a week. Meanwhile, evacuations are underway. But this horrific experience is not limited to this eastern Canadian city. It is being shared by Western Canadian province too, Alberta. Except here, the situation is much worse. Unprecedented wildfires are raging in Alberta, which too has declared an emergency. This province is home to 4 million people, tens of thousands of whom have been displaced. Their homes are burning. Millions of hectares of land has been charred by fire. About 2 weeks ago, this is what the authorities said.
Our peak burning period, which is when the temperatures are at their highest and the fuels are at their driest, is still in front of us.
They were right. The skies are still choking in smoke. There is no end in sight for these record-breaking fires. Question is, why is this happening? During the spring, the snow begins to melt. This exposes tree branches and dead leaves underneath. Experts call this fuel because they are flammable. And warm temperatures and dry conditions only increase the flammability. Both of which Canada saw this year. It dived into summer with record-breaking temperatures and a terrible heat wave, especially in areas like Alberta and British Columbia, which saw both record-breaking heat and below-average rainfall, which was even 75 to 100% less than usual in some areas. This just made the entire situation worse. And this is alarming. Parts of Canada do see wildfires, but they don't usually come this early. What's more, they aren't usually this spread out. Authorities are working to control these wildfires, but this time it's challenging because big wildfires aren't concentrated to a specific part. There are a lot of big ones spread across different territories. About 100 wildfires burned just Alberta, and Canada is doing its bit to get things under control. But matters are only getting worse. Much of the fire season is still left. Experts say there is no end in sight. It seems like there will be months before the situation comes under control, which only feels like a trailer for what is to come. As our climate warms, we expect to see more fire, more power disruptions, more burning houses, more people displaced, and many more clouds of smoke. Unseasonal heat has become more frequent, probable, and intense, all because of human action. Our world is on fire. Question is, when will we wake up and smell the smoke? For our last story today, let's talk about Venice, the floating city of Italy, which is known for its beautiful bridges and winding canals. But this weekend, it woke up to an unusual sight. Its central waterway has turned green. Now let's set our expectations right. The Venice canals don't have crystal clear blue waters. Everyone knows that. We're used to their dirty, dark green colors. But this time, the canal water has turned bright green. It feels like Hulk took a bath in the water, or that Shrek the ogre made the canal its secret home. You would even expect Kermit the Frog to suddenly emerge out of the water, but with an army of several other green frogs. Because this green patch doesn't seem like the work of just one wholesome frog. Don't believe us? Here's a report.
This is Venice, the city of canals, arguably one of Italy's most picturesque cities. But now it has an odd green problem. Look at these visuals. This is the city's central waterway, and now a patch of water in it has turned fluorescent green. Perplexing, right? The Venetians can relate. They have no idea where this green patch came from, but they're quite keen on finding out. Local authorities have begun an urgent investigation. They've collected water samples, which will be tested for answers. But while the world awaits them, it has turned to conspiracy theories. Many speculations are floating across the internet, but one of them seems plausible. It suggests that the green water is a mark of protest, that environmental activists released dye into the water, and that this dye turned water green. This is not difficult to believe. After all, a wave of disruptive activism has swept across Europe, and environmental awareness groups have hit Italy as well. This month itself, a climate action group stepped into Rome's Trevi Fountain. It's a popular tourist spot, and its water was mixed with diluted charcoal. Soon the water of this beautiful fountain turned black. But even if we stick to the color green, this is not the first time Italy has witnessed something like this. In fact, it feels like history is being repeated. Let's go back to 1968. This is an Argentine artist named Nicolas Garcia Uriburu. He dyed the waters of the Grand Canal in Venice green. Why? To raise awareness of ecological issues. Venice has been of particular interest to environmental activists because it is one of the world's most fragile cities, constantly threatened by rising sea levels. It was hit by major floods in 2019. While those waters receded, its problems haven't. The city is literally sinking. So it has now come up with an ambitious $6 billion plan to save Venice from flooding. The city has also instituted strict rules for tourists. The authorities want their help in preserving the environment. But this hasn't calmed environmentalists. They want the government to do better. And some have resorted to chaos to gain eyeballs. It's not clear whether this incident is an act of protest or not. The investigation has only just begun. So far, it indicates that people need not be scared. Investigators say this green patch has been caused by a harmless dye called fluorescein. It's used to track the flow of water. This substance is not uncommon. But here's the catch. Usually experts use 1 spoonful of this dye to analyze water flow. But in this case, it seems like at least 1 kg of the dye was dumped in the water. Talk about getting your calculations wrong. But was it deliberate or an accident? It's difficult to believe that something like this just slipped into the canal like an oops moment. Whatever may be the reason, as long as a giant green squid monster is not releasing ink into the water, there's no need to feel blue over this fluorescent green.
And with that, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Chile, thousands of people gathered in Santiago to break a Guinness World Record. People formed the largest human image of a bicycle. In the US, Olympic champion Carissa Moore won women's title at Surf Ranch Pro, and SpaceX launched its latest Falcon 9 rocket on Saturday. And finally, what makes May 29th significant? Taking you back in history. On this day in 1953, for the first time, 2 explorers reached the top of the world's highest mountain, the Everest. Edmund Hillary was a beekeeper from New Zealand, and Tenzing Norgay was a skilled climber from Nepal. Mount Everest Day marks their remarkable accomplishment. We leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Welcomed and congratulated by their fellow members of the expedition. Poor Tenzing descended from his glory into the center of a minor political storm. He was born in Nepal and grew up in India, and both nations are now at loggerheads to claim him as their national. However, Tenzing was unruffled when Colonel Hunt congratulated him and Hillary. 2 unassuming men had climbed the 29,000-foot monarch of the Himalayas.
Moving through the clouds there, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off. There's that gorgeous view on your screen there